Now, the program to help you and your family get fit and stay fit with a biblical foundation without a one-size-fits-all plan. It's Faith Family Fitness with your host, Full Armor Sports and national champion coach, Jason Lupo.
Welcome to Faith Family Fitness on 100.7 The Word with Jason Lupo. I am Aaron Lujan, and we have Jason Lupo via phone today. How you doing, Jason?
Hey, I'm doing good. I'm in sunny St. George, Utah for Senior Zones meet.
Nice.
Out here with one of my athletes.
St. George, Utah. That's my halfway point to California from Colorado Springs.
It's a beautiful growing city, and it's super warm. We've had 60, 70 degree weather.
Very nice.
The entire time. So it's a good break from the winter of Colorado.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for making it happen, Jason. I am sitting in the captain seat today, and we're going to quarterback this conversation about what it is to be a man. This is part 5, I believe, and specifically we're going to discuss the world's response to what I call an onslaught on the culture, and specifically it's known as the red pill movement. And Jason, you know, we were talking about this offline. I think that there's a lot of people out there that are kind of have a peripheral understanding of what's happening culturally with this red pill movement. Kind of what are your thoughts? You kind of expressed that this is something that's in your peripheral. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting because there is so much conversation about what has happened to the demasculinization of men. And what's interesting is that the culture as a whole outside of the church has seen a problem with this as well. And so they've created their own solution. And it's got some good elements to it, but at the same time, it's not a biblical solution. It's not a biblical understanding of what it means to be a man. But I do find it interesting that the culture as a whole has said, hey, enough's enough. We're done with this. So it's neat to see that the culture at large is moving in the direction of restoring masculinity. But they beat the church to it. And when they beat the church to it, there's a lot of downfalls, there's a lot of pitfalls, there's a lot of issues with that.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into the details of that here in a moment. You are listening to Faith, Family, Fitness, and Freedom on 100.7 The Word.
Full Armor Sports Teams has a new facility for after-school youth programs. It's located at 2380 Montebello near North Academy and Union with 2 pools for swim lessons and swim teams, a weight room for powerlifting, conditioning, and more. Full Armor Sports Teams is a Christ-centered and family-oriented organization bringing the youth of Colorado Springs together. For more info on after-school and homeschool programs, go to fullarmorsportsteams.com or call 719-629-SWIM.
You are listening to 100.7 The Word, Faith, Family, Fitness, and Freedom. I'm Aaron Lujan. We're here with Jason Lupo from St. George, Utah. Jason and I were just talking about the cultural response to toxic masculinity, this onslaught facing men today. And we wanted to take a deeper dive into how the culture is responding and how it's not biblical, and sort of put together some of the pitfalls, map it out for you on how a lot of godly men could potentially fall into this trap. Andrew Tate is the most Googled man in the world, apparently. He's been leading, or at least the figurehead of what we call the red pill movement, which has acknowledged this cultural onslaught. It is addressing, and Andrew's doing a really good job at galvanizing really tens of millions of young men. And there's a lot of power to be said about that when you can command the attention of tens of millions of young men in their early 20s and 30s. That's a threat to the powers that be. This has become a very powerful movement, and essentially what it's redefining are gender differences. This is the traditional role of man. This is the traditional role of woman, according to biology, psychology, and behavior. It does advocate for traditional gender roles. The movement emphasizes the importance of men serving as providers and protectors, women serving as nurturers and caregivers. It also advances this idea of hypergamy. Red pill followers believe that women are biologically driven to seek the best possible partner in terms of resources and social status. And it also spends a lot of time focusing on male self-improvement, encouraging men to get fit, advance their careers, work on their social skills in order to become more attractive to women. And something that we'll get into here in a moment. It's this criticism that I have of the movement is it's very I focused. It's very me focused. It's not serving the kingdom of God. The red pill movement also rejects feminism. It is a negative force in society. It's acknowledging the fact that this threat is dismembering the culture, which I think is why it's been appealing to a lot of people who otherwise are not accepting the toxic masculinity narrative. It critiques modern dating, which obviously is a major problem, and it embraces the patriarchy. The red pill sees patriarchy as natural and beneficial and has allowed men to thrive and contribute to society. So there's obviously a lot to unpack there. That's sort of the overarching red pill movement. Jason, what are your thoughts on what the culture is serving up in response to toxic masculinity?
Well, I'll tell you, here's my concern, okay? If you remember back in history, you said something that was interesting, right? Andrew Tate's the most Googled man in the world, and he's impacting millions of young men. And if you look back in history, Nazi Germany came to power because of this redirecting youth and redefining what it meant to serve their country. And Nazi youth really got Hitler to power. And so the church failed in Germany at that time because they didn't step up soon enough. And I'm afraid that in this case, the church has not done enough, has not worked fast enough to address the issue inside the church. And so people are looking elsewhere. And the problem really is with this movement is that the movement is kind of empowering men to a point where I think we're reinforcing some of this one night stand stuff and the dating where, there's power in abstinence. There's power in abstinence. I chose the road of abstinence my entire life. I believe that it's biblical, but the government, the state, everybody has essentially eliminated abstinent sexual education.
Right.
In fact, some states don't even mention that abstinence is a choice. And it's leading to these relationship issues, and it's leading to our high divorce rates in this country. And so I think that's a huge issue, but I really just would love to see the church stand up and have a response to this. And that's what we're going to talk about, like, what should the church's response be next week?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to look at it from a historical standpoint and go, we've seen this before. And when the church doesn't address issues fast enough, it allows the culture to take over. And the problem in today's society is now the church has completely given in to culture in a lot of respects. And we're seeing all these churches that have very skewed viewpoints on the LGBT movement. And we're even seeing churches that are saying, well, we're not going to read this section of the verse because it's offensive. I don't know if you've seen that Instagram video floating around.
No, but there was a vacuum of power that needed to be filled when the church took its hands off the wheel, and the culture has responded. And you bring up the issue of relationships and sexuality. And I think that that's my biggest beef with the red pill movement. And I think that's what's going to lead a lot of young men astray. God's way is the best way. It's the design. And so mankind has come in and filled the void of the biblical way, God's way. And so now we have men who are focused on self-improvement for the purposes of attracting women and sort of this hookup culture and not respecting the marriage bed. And so I think it's going to continue to lead to more problems. I think that the red pill movement, if you've listened to Andrew Tate and some of these other figures in the movement, is they seem angry. They seem hurt by women. They seem like that rejection from that 16-year-old crush they had in high school. They just never got over it. And this movement is sort of feeding that anger. And a lot of the content that these YouTube red pill creators are putting out there, from my perspective, seems to be playing on these emotions of revenge, and it's rooted in anger. And what does the biblical worldview say? That we're to do all things in love, and that we're to serve God's kingdom, die to ourselves, right? And in this movement, it's all about, how can I serve my pleasures, my desires? Maybe I'm viewing women in the context of the red pill movement as sexual objects. And so I'm going to improve myself so that I can get the woman, so I can get the things. And ultimately what you're living for in that point is for yourself. And you're living a satanic worldview, right? Do what thou wilt. And the biblical worldview, which we'll get into next week, is to find a wife for the purposes of marriage and dying to yourself and serving your family. And that's my biggest criticism of the red pill movement, is it's all about I focus, and it's going to lead men in the wrong path. Jesus himself said that they will come to you as wolves in sheep's clothing. The people's ears are being tickled, and we need to address that.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue that needs to be addressed. And whenever you leave gaps in society, something's going to fill it, right? Whenever there's a gap, whenever there's a question, theologically or from a philosophy perspective, somebody's always filled the gap, and it's not always right. And so whenever there's a question, people try to seek answers to it, and that's what science is all about. But we've seen in the past that some of these psychologists that are looking at human behavior and coming up with theories, we've proved them wrong over the years. But somebody's going to try to fill it, and somebody's going to try to give an explanation to it. And I think for majority of these things, we already have an explanation, right? God has given men a great deal of responsibility and a great deal of power. And whether we use it for right or wrong or whatever, it is up to each and every one of us. But we have it. And what the left is attempted to do and the woke society is attempted to do is completely strip that power of men. And we see this want for men to regain that power, but now they're regaining it for purposes that are not to please and honor God. I pray with my athletes before every meet, and every time, it's about swim to glorify God, lift to glorify God. We're doing this to glorify God because God has given us the talents to be able to perform at the best of our ability. And so I think that there is a need for a movement that says, hey, men, you need to step up. You need to be the best man that you can be, because that's honoring to God. Not because it's good for you, not because it's good for your pocketbook, but you need to be the best man that you can be because it honors God.
Well, the red pill movement.
And that's why we self-improve.
Yeah, and the red pill movement speaking to lost young men who understand inherently deep down inside that there is an order of things, specifically patriarchy. They acknowledge the dysfunction in dating. They acknowledge that feminism is toxic. They understand that self-improvement is a positive thing. So the red pill movement is very agreeable. It's very attractive. But I think what you said is the major differentiator. Are we doing these things? Are we improving ourselves to glorify God? Or are we doing this to serve our own personal agenda and our own pleasure? Are we being critical of the dating scene so that we can ultimately serve and love a woman to the point where we would give our own lives for her? Or are we doing this? Are we trying to be attractive for the purposes of just attaining women for transactional purposes? And so I think that that's the crux of the argument today is, who is this going to serve? Is this going to serve ourselves, or is this going to serve God? So, the red pill movement, I think, has woken up a lot of men to the onslaught and the threats that we're facing. But I think the church needs to step in and make a serious course correction and bring men into a path of truth and in light, which is we're to serve God, not men. The other thing that go ahead.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, right, like there's a power struggle that's constantly going to continue, and I do think that the sexual revolution thing is a big component of some of this, but there's a power struggle that always ensues, right? Like I think that there's a will for men, for humans to want some sort of power. They want control. They want control over their lives, and I think that's what we tend to see is people wanting to take charge and take control. When what is biblical is to give everything to God, let Him handle it, right? Allow Him to take control of your life. And man's will is to take control of their own lives and their own power. And so, we see that there are godly men too that are seeking positions of power, such as elected positions. And when they go to seek those positions, once they get in office and they have the power, what are they doing with it? And that's the big thing too, is that we see these godly men and we want them in positions of power. We want them in leadership. We make them pastors. We make them elected officials. We put them in heads of schools, and we give them these powers. But then once they get into that position, are they acting on their own faith and the powers that God gave them, or are they going to take that and use their own self-interest above the will and the honor of God?
And that's going back to the question of who do you serve? Are you serving God or are you serving mammon? And I think that's the root of the issue, is men do not know who they are in their creator. They do not know their purpose, that their purpose is to serve the Lord and to live out their calling in obedience to God. And it's bringing up more questions than answers, Jason. You know, the thing that I can't keep my eyes off of is that we live in such a distracted and loud culture. I mean, you turn on your Instagram, you turn on your social media, and immediately all of the messaging of, you know, what is wrong with society and all of the distractions and temptations are constantly abound. How do young men, or just men in general, live out their calling to be the godly man that God has called them to be in such a distracting and loud culture? How does one do that in 2024?
Well, I think it's interesting because you bring up the theme that I always say, right? We ask more questions than we're ever going to answer on this show. And it gets people thinking, and I think that's funny. I say it almost every show that we do ask more questions than we ever give answers to. But as for how do men embrace the calling of God, I think that it comes down to really listening and really waiting patiently for the word of God. And I think too often we step into situations where it isn't our timing. And then we wonder why it didn't work out. And sometimes we blame God because all of a sudden, hey, you know, I thought I was supposed to do this and it didn't work out. Well, I mean, sometimes it's just not the timing. Like, our timing is not the timing of God. And I think It's hard because it is really easy, right? I'm a coach. We want to win. I'm coming out here. I want my athlete to perform to the best of her ability, right? I want all my athletes to perform to the best of their abilities. And so sometimes our goals don't necessarily align with what God has in mind too. And it's really easy as a coach to get that out of whack, to go, the most important thing is to win. No, the most important thing is to honor God. The most important thing is to speak life into these kids that I'm coaching at Full Armor. Like that's the most important thing. And it's easy to go, well, no, the goal is to win. Well, yes, at the end of the day, like, winning is important. It's how we keep our mission. It's how we keep our business alive. Like, we have to perform or we die. And God knows that, like, but at the same time, that shouldn't be the ultimate goal. I've always said that if we build a strong program, we build a strong team, we honor God, that the times will fall and we're going to compete to the best of our ability. And
Matthew
I believe
6, that. Seek first the kingdom of God and all things will be added onto you, right?
Yep. Amen to that.
Well, I think that tees us up pretty good for next week. We're going to dive into how do the people of God respond to this loud call to answer what is a man? How does the church raise up a new generation of young men to be able to lead their families and honor God in everything that they do, which will ultimately rebuild a culture and rebuild a nation and a world? Any parting last words, Jason?
You know, I think that at the end of the day, right, like, it is critical that we start this process in our boys and we start building up our boys from a young age. And we need the help of the church to do that. And I'm not just talking about the church as a building as a whole, but, you know, mentorship from other males, right? And we've lost that for a variety of different reasons. And I think we're going to touch on that next week of how we've lost track. But, you know, we look at things like the Boy Scouts. It's no longer the Boy Scouts, it's the Scouts. We've added the girls on. And whether you know, people can believe that's a good thing, but at the end of the day, the boys need something special. And what we've done is we've created this society where we are so focused on providing opportunities for girls. We're past that point. Title IX occurred a long time ago. We've met the needs of Title IX, and we've exceeded the needs of Title IX. And now the problem is that we don't have anything for the boys left. We don't have anything for the boys left. And the Boy Scouts, things like that, were super critical in raising up men. And it's not anymore. It's not there. It's not the same as it used to be. We've added the girls on, and now the boys don't have a place for them to be boys. The boys don't have a place for them to learn these valuable life skills and to have the mentorship of male adults speaking into their lives. And so, that's the first key of where I think we've drastically fallen is some of the steps that the Boy Scouts have taken. And I think they're partly responsible for some of this stuff.
I couldn't agree more. If we don't save the boys, we don't have men. And if we don't have men, we lose our culture and we lose everything. This is an all or nothing game that we're playing, guys. You've been listening to Faith, Family, Fitness, and Freedom on 100.7 The Word with Jason Lupo and Aaron Lujan.
Thanks for listening to Faith, Family, Fitness, a presentation of Full Armor Sports Teams. Teamwork is at the core of any successful organization. At Full Armor Sports, led by national champion coach Jason Lupo, a Christ-centered approach to sports fundamentals and fitness has earned his company the respect of athletes and their parents. Full Armor Sports is committed to helping youth in our community experience growth through sports and to strive for improvement and excellence. Further, youth compete as individuals coming together with a sense of teamwork, camaraderie, and support for one another. At Full Armor Sports, the reality is achievements, failures, wins, and losses eventually fade away. But the bonds team members form through competition evolve into relationships lasting forever. Learn more at fullarmorsports.com.
This has been Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom on 100.7 The Word. I want to thank Aaron Lujan so much for taking today's driver's seat, quarterback seat, whatever you want to call it. He's in the studio. I'm in St. George, Utah with one of my athletes from Full Armor Swim Team. If you are looking for a place for your kids to call home, please check us out, fullamorswimteam.com. That's armor, the traditional spelling, ARMOUR. We are also adding some unique, fun programs this summer. We're adding a track and field program and a boxing program. So you can drop your kids off at 9, pick them up at 1, and we'll keep them exercising the entire time. They can run, swim, and box all at the same time, all at the same location, back to back. Give them a unique experience. And if you've been listening to this show on what it means to be a man, that's a huge focus on our team in kind of restoring and teaching our boys and our girls on leadership and what it means to be a man. And so we would love to have your kids in our program. We'd love to show you the Full Armor difference. Check us out. If you have any questions on this show, or you want to listen to this episode again, or any past episodes, go to faithfamilyfit.org to find out more information. Join us next Saturday at 9 a.m. on 100.7 The Word for Faith, Family, Fitness, Freedom. Thank you for joining us. See you next week.
This has been Faith, Family, Fitness with Coach Jason Lupo of Full Armor Sports Teams of Colorado Springs. Join him at the same time next week for Faith, Family, Fitness on The Word 100.7.